Hello, fellow patriots. As the Liberals' prorogation of Parliament stretches into its 6th week, the impact of the inability of Canadians to scrutinize the Liberal government's decisions is really starting to show. And in this week's episode, veteran political strategist Sean Schnell and I are going to break down some particularly egregious examples, including a $70,000 Oscar party that you paid for. Mark Carney had a liar, pants on fire week. It was really bad. Our lame duck prime minister made 104 appointments. Mark Carney also got turned into a meme. And we're going to also break down some speculation now that we're kind of in the middle of the Liberal leadership race. It's about to draw to a close. What's going to happen over the next few weeks? Sean, I'm losing my voice. A $70,000 Oscar party. This was crazy. This was crazy.
Yeah, this story just is mind-boggling, and this is the sort of thing that infuriates taxpayers regardless of how they vote, regardless of their political affiliation. This just makes them crazy. So
this was a story you and I actually came across several months ago. It was not several months ago, beginning of January. Our office and our team, we routinely scrutinize government expenditures, announcements about government expenditures. And usually what we end up doing is using different parliamentary tools to scrutinize them, be it order paper questions or committee questions. But of course, Parliament has been shut down. And we found this announcement buried on a government website that I think it was Telefilm via the Consul General of LA.
Yeah, I'm just popping it up here.
So for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see this little screenshot essentially announcing that they were going to spend $70,000 on an Oscar party. And the date of the party says February 27th. So that would have happened this week. And, that's more than most people could ever even comprehend about spending on their wedding. Never mind a taxpayer funded party in Los Angeles in this economic and political climate.
I mean, this is a lot more than most Canadians make in a year for their salary. And so I think the thought of spending $70,000 on an event, on a party, on an Oscar party is outrageous to most people. And it makes them angry because here on the one hand, you have a government that in the Liberals have been talking out of one side of their mouth saying that they are concerned about the cost of living and we're doing things to try and help, and Canadians are seeing, well, that doesn't look like it's
baloney.
Happening. That's not happening because I can't afford groceries, I can't afford rent, I can't afford to buy a house. And then they see things like this, where you have a government that is throwing big, lavish, fancy, expensive parties on their dime.
And it is a big, lavish, expensive party because they did this last year too.
Right. Yeah, this is not the first time.
I should back up and say we were holding on to this information until it was closer to the event because we were like, they're not actually going to do this, are they? Well, it turns out, so I think it was Blacklock's reporter also found this out, and they reached out for comment. Couldn't get comment from the consulate, but we know they did this last year. And not only did they spend a whole bunch of tax dollars on like a really lavish party with red carpets and very fancy food and cocktails, they also sent the CBC out to report it on your tax dollar too. And I think we have a clip of the CBC reporter at this party last year in Los Angeles.
Last year, the big event at the end of the night, and there was a poutine truck. No poutine this year, but lobster roll, anyone?
It's just gross. So, we're in this tense relationship with the US right now. Many people can't wrap their heads around spending $200 on a basket of groceries, never mind $70,000 on a cocktail party. And I guess the reason why I wanted to start with this example today in today's show is that this is really a very clear example of one of a million examples of why Parliament needs to sit, because we need to be able to scrutinize government expenditures. And I don't think a lot of Canadians realize that there's something called the public accounts, and it's essentially like a balance sheet. It's an accounting of what the government spent. Those public accounts were delivered 9 months late. They weren't delivered till the last day of Parliament before the House rose in December. We only got one round of questions with department officials on the day after the House rose, and then we couldn't follow up with any other questions because they prorogued Parliament. And that makes a difference, because if the government comes and says, oh, well, we need to pass another bill for all X, Y, and Z spending, well, how do we know if the money that we've already spent that has caused inflation is being delivered appropriately and being spent on good things? We don't. And, it really is taxation without representation right now. And, when we see things like a $70,000 Oscar party, I don't think there's anyone that's listening to the show that's going to have a $70,000 Oscar party this weekend. I mean, if you are, we'd like to know you, I think. But
well, but you make the point, right? The broader point is not even that it's a $70,000 Oscar party, but that Parliament is closed and that we can't ask questions about it, and that Canadians aren't able to have that level of accountability on how their tax dollars are being spent. And that's the big point of this. And I think people get upset about this because they see the hypocrisy in it, but then they also understand the level of unaccountability that's happening within the government right now, and that is frustrating to people that are having a hard time making ends meet. And so if the government wants to make the case for a $70,000 Oscar party, go nuts. I think they'll have a hard time doing it. But the bottom line is that we can't even ask these types of questions. We can't even
they're hiding.
See exactly what they're spending money on and why.
The good bridge into the next segment here is that Canadians need to understand why the Liberals have suspended Parliament. So, I mean, right. The Liberals have suspended Parliament, I think, to avoid scrutiny, but they've also done it to replace Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party without having to deal with parliamentary scrutiny, right? So they're in the middle of their leadership race right now. But if you were looking for transparency or accountability during the Liberal leadership race, you would be sorely disappointed, because this week the Liberals had their only two leadership debates. One was in French on Monday night, the other was in English on Tuesday night, and it was it was not a lot of excitement there, not a lot of hard questions being asked of the front runner. I know you had some observations too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're being kind in saying that there wasn't a lot of excitement there. It was broadly reported as kind of a snooze fest, and unfortunately, you didn't see a lot of hard-hitting questions either from the media or from the other candidates themselves. And you and I talked about this for the last couple of weeks of what should happen at these debates, and really, you see Mark Carney, who is by all accounts the front runner, going virtually unopposed by not only the media, but by his own leadership competitors here. And the types of questions that were being asked were softball at best, I think. And the concerning part about that was he wasn't even able to get those questions right. And
no.
And that's the part that I think is most troubling out of this, aside from some of the vague positions that he's taken, is that this has not been hard hitting, really digging deep type questioning that he's endured, and he's still screwing it up.
So you and I had talked about how Chrystia Freeland really needed to score some punches against him, and she didn't even bother throwing any. There were so many softballs she could have gone after him, and she just didn't. To me, it feels like they've all kind of given up. And they're just kind of hoping that he's not going to punish them for daring to run against them. And
like, why would you do that?
It was an odd spectacle, but Carney did self-own himself on at least 3 occasions. So let's break them down. The first one you caught instantly, and it was, this man is, one of the key criticisms against him is, again, by his own words, he's a globalist elitist.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really out of touch guy who is like obscenely wealthy, has not been around normal people, normal Canadians for maybe even ever. And so he really self-owned himself in reinforcing that narrative. And why don't you explain what happened with the grocery issue, and then we'll play the clip.
Okay, so the first debate was the French language debate, and one of the moderators for the debate asked this question of all the candidates, because obviously cost of living and inflation has been a big issue in the country, and in part with that has been the cost of groceries and food. And so they asked this question to the panel, all the candidates, asking if they know what the average cost of a Canadian grocery bill is. And you see the candidates' reaction and response, or lack thereof. So we have a clip there, which I can show here, and then we can unpack it for maybe those that are just listening that can't see it.
And just to reemphasize, the clip we're about to show you, it's from the French language debate. So what you're hearing is the interpreters. And what you're not hearing is Mark Carney answer the question. So go ahead.
Here, how much does a grocery basket cost for the average family? For four people?
I'm not one who deals with the food shopping at the
200 to 250 in Toronto. It's about 250. Yes, I've done grocery shopping.
According to two organizations, it's approximately...
I save more than my husband when I do the shopping.
It's $300 per week. That's the Canadian average.
If you'll allow me.
So Carney just stood there and he's like, I don't know.
Didn't say a thing.
My butler does my grocery shopping. My butler goes grocery shopping for my personal chef. Like, that was the posture of what, to me, he was conveying. Just out of touch, aloof. And I think he actually doubled down on this, right? Later in the debate, or was it in the English language debate?
It was in the English language debate. And so this, again, just to paint some context for this. So a full 24 hours between that disastrous non-response about what every Canadian family deals with on a weekly basis, going out and purchasing groceries. And so 24 hours later in the English debate is given another opportunity to sort of clean up that answer, as we talk about in politics, go and fix the mistake. And yeah, he provides another bizarre answer here. So I've got the clip.
Mark Carney.
Okay. One of the reasons why families have a hard time to afford their groceries is because we haven't had productivity. That's the issue. It's
families aren't productive enough, Sean. You need to work another 2 or 3 jobs before you can afford groceries. Did you know that? That's what Mark Carney thinks.
Canadians can tell you exactly why they can't afford groceries, because they are so expensive and they don't have enough money in their bank account, thanks to all the other costs that have gone up under this Liberal government. This is not, like I said, these are not hard questions.
No, and I saw some Liberal pundits, like analysts, be like, well, that's not what he meant. He was talking about the concept of economic productivity and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that is exactly the way he said it. It was, you are not productive enough as a person. You're not earning enough. It's kind of like, if somebody bought a house in the 1980s and now it's worth $700,000 or $1 million, and they just, they go to their kids and are like, well, maybe if you worked a little harder, you could afford a house like this. And it's like, you're missing the point, right? And I think that sort of aloof arrogance from him really shone through on that answer. And that is not going to cut it in a general election at all. And it's more important, but more importantly, it's not going to cut it with Canadians, right? Like, that's sort of an attitude. Because like what you saw there with him was exactly how he would treat designing a federal budget, right? It wouldn't be focused on affordability measures that are tangible for every Canadian. It's like, well, you're not productive enough. We're not productive enough. That's what it is. It's like, okay, well, what about all the inflationary spending that you advocated for while you were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor? Maybe that had something to do with it, or your carbon tax, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, Canadians are fully aware as to why their grocery bills have crept up over and over and over again under this Liberal government. They have seen themselves being taxed to death at every single opportunity, and they have seen the Liberal government at the advice of people like Freeland and Carney shovel millions and millions of dollars out the door that has done nothing to help their individual circumstances. And so when you get a softball question saying like, well, what is the average family paying for groceries, and what do you think about the high cost of groceries, and they get that kind of nonsensical answer, of course it's not going to cut it with them, because this is their reality. They live with it every week, and a guy like Mark Carney does not have shared lived experience with them at all.
Not at all. But he is a liar. I can say that with confidence this week. So he, another cell phone in the debate was he had two issues. One that actually just came to light today.
Mm-hmm.
But the first was on an issue with the company that he formerly chaired, Brookfield. Now, Brookfield is a multi-billion-dollar company. It's huge. It's a multi-billion-dollar, I call it an everything company, because it has holdings in so many different industries and areas. Its reach is really quite large internationally. But it was headquartered in Canada. And while Mark Carney was the board chair, Brookfield made the decision to move its headquarters from Canada to the United States, to New York City. Now, it gets worse, but I kind of want to lay out the timeline for this lie. Where do we want to start? Do we want to start with the clip? Do we want to start with the lie itself?
I think the clip is good because it encapsulates both the issues, I think, well.
Okay, so this is the clip of Mark Carney discussing this issue about the headquarters move at the English language debate, right? Or was it French?
Right, yeah, right after the English language debate, he was asked about this.
Here you go.
Next question, please. Prochaine question.
Bonsoir, Frédéric Plante with the Globe and Mail. You were the vice chairman at Brookfield Asset Management prior to
the chair. I was the chair.
Sorry. In the fall, they moved their head office from Toronto to New York. Did you approve of that decision, and what does this say about your commitment to growing Canada's economy and betting on Canada as for now?
Okay. So two things. I'll just correct a few factual things. One, I was chair of Brookfield Asset Management. I ceased to be chair on the 15th, I think, of January when I announced for leadership. Also ceased to be chair of Bloomberg as well. Ceased to be United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Ceased to be a number of other things. So I resigned all my positions because I am all in for Canada, all in for this leadership, all in during this time of crisis to build our great country, okay? That's the first thing. Second, the formal decision of the board happened after I ceased to be on the board. I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management. No longer have a role, obviously, as I resigned in the middle of January.
Lies and deceit on two fronts.
There is so much there.
Lies. Okay. So he said that the board, the decision to move the headquarters was taken by the board or discussed by the board after he resigned as chair. But our colleague, Michael Barrett, an Ontario Conservative MP, he did a press conference and he's like, I don't think so. I've got the receipts. And we can, for those of you watching this on YouTube, we can put the receipts up here. So essentially, he found a piece of correspondence issued by Brookfield's board after, it was prior to Mark Carney resigning from the board. So he was the chair of this meeting where essentially they recommended to move. This is where they made the recommendation to move.
You see this recommendation in a letter.
Yeah. So it's right there. Like it's a bold-faced lie. Now, what's even more interesting is I think Andrew Scheer, the leader, House leader for the party, he put this timeline up so people could actually see the lie. I don't know if we have that as well too.
I don't think we've got that one.
Okay, so long story short, this decision was made. This board decision was made after Donald Trump was elected as president of the United States, and after Donald Trump threatened tariffs on Canada, and before Mark Carney resigned. So here you've got this guy. So first of all, he's lying. He flat out lied. He did. Then you have him making a major decision on a big billion-dollar Canadian company to move its headquarters to the U.S. after these tariffs threat came in place. So it's like, it's I'm just gonna say it's bullshit that he's saying, "Oh, I'm in it for Canada." Like that's not like. Anyway, I don't know. Like, why would he lie about this? Just own it and just be like, "Yep, no." It's like, did he not think he was going to get fact checked on it?
I don't know. It's a bit bizarre because it hasn't been all that hard to unpack this. And kudos to your colleagues and to the reporters that have been digging into this. But he really needs to provide answers to this, because it is a total contradiction and lie.
Now,
That
I'm gonna correct you on something. You said kudos to the reporters digging into this. The reporters were not helpful on this issue.
Yeah, fair enough.
It was really Michael's work that uncovered this. In fact, some of the headlines that we got after that we exposed this, Michael had a press conference. They were brutal. So one particular headline was the Globe and Mail. They started off early in the day with this headline. It says, "Conservatives accuse Carney of lying about role in Brookfield's move to New York." So they didn't even look at the receipts. Like, they didn't even look at the evidence. They put this headline out. Everybody else follows suit. But it was interesting because they were actually forced to reverse course. So they did have to change the headline. Carney says he wasn't on the board when Brookfield formalized a move to the US, but company records say otherwise. So I think it is important to note that, like, Carney's getting a free ride from the mainstream media. The headline "Conservatives say" is completely egregious. We had like hard evidence there that showed that he lied. And
yeah, and it was all over the place
did.
where they were accusing conservatives
Yes.
of saying something that wasn't proven to be true.
And maybe
I think
I
we have
answered
another one from CBC here too.
Oh, right. Of course, the CBC. Conservatives say Carney is lying about his role moving to investment firm's office in the US. So it's conservatives say. It's not, well, here's a letter that shows that he lied, which we provided to the media at the time of the press conference, right? So, I mean, maybe I answered my own question. I was like, why wouldn't he just explain this in a press conference? I think he knows that he can get away with it because the media aren't vetting him right now. They really
Well,
aren't.
there's not a good answer. There's no good
No.
answer to this.
And
like you said, if he just owned it, but owning it is horrible, because for all the reasons you said, it was after the tariff threat, and you're exporting Canadian jobs from the country at a time of national crisis. It looks bad on every level. And so then, sorry, go ahead.
But the cover up is often worse than the sin, right? Like,
Sure.
because now not only did he make a decision that moved Canadian jobs from Canada to the US after the threat of tariffs from Donald Trump, he's also a liar, right? So, but it's funny though.
And so, and I mean, we see this sort of headline coming out of the National Post here now, right? Is that the questionable claims are piling up.
Now there is one more questionable claim, but I want to show you something that one of his endorsement people, Cabinet Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, did. Jonathan Wilkinson, I guess he's still the environment minister, right? One of the guys that has always opposed pipelines and natural resource development. He actually tried to rescue Mark Carney. So he was asked the same question this week in Ottawa. We have that clip.
Yep.
You've got to listen to this.
Irrespective of this particular instance, anyone who knows anything about business knows that boards actually have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders.
Oh, but guys, listen, Mark made this decision because he was working in the best interest of shareholders. I mean, that's what he does. I don't even think these guys, this guy's running to be the Prime Minister of Canada. He will be the Prime Minister of Canada after this race. He endorsed him. And can you imagine being so arrogant that you're like, well, he did the right thing for his shareholders, when like they're trying to frame the ballot question as who is the best to defend Canadian jobs against Donald Trump? Well, he just said, well, Mark Carney works in the interest of his shareholders, not in the people of Canada.
But again, to your point, why isn't he being pressed on? Why is he lying about this? Why that it comes to the heart of the character on the matter, right? And so not only was the decision bad, but like you said, the cover up on it is horrible too, and the arrogance from both these last clips is just crazy. You've got Mark Carney that at the beginning of it, he is far more concerned about correcting the reporter's mischaracterization of his CV and rattling off a whole bunch of his so-called credentials. And then, yeah, you've got, what was it? Well, anybody that knows anything about business. And it is a mockery of Canadians and their ability to understand the difference between a lie and a business decision and all of this in the midst and in the context of somebody who's running to be prime minister. And that is the crazy part about all of this is he is running to be prime minister. He is running at a time when there are millions of jobs on the line for people and livelihoods on the line. And he can't seem to get his story straight. And he also can't seem to put himself into a position where he could possibly empathize or understand what most Canadians are thinking or feeling. And so, like, on every level, it's bad.
And this wasn't the only example of this week of him lying this week. So you put that one story up. So we're recording this on Friday. There was sort of breaking news this afternoon on the tail end of his comment there when he was asked by that Globe and Mail reporter, well, what about Brookfield Asset Management? He said, well, I've resigned from everything. He even said this at his campaign launch as well, too. I've resigned from everything. I'm all in. I'm all in for Canada, right? Well, turns out that's not the case. So the National Post this afternoon put up a story. The headline says, Carney says he resigned from all his roles to run for Liberal leadership. It turns out he hasn't. And then the subheader is, I've resigned all my positions. I've resigned all my positions, full stop, Carney said on January 16th. But their reporters found out otherwise. So he is still the chair of Chatham House, which is a registered charity in England. It's a very famous charity, does like some, broadly put, academic work. It's a very sort of elite institution. The Peterson Institute for International Economics, he's still part of. The Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford, at Oxford University, says he's still a member of their advisory board. And it goes on and on. So again, he's just making these claims, and he hasn't resigned all of his positions, which reinforces the need for what we've been talking about the last 3 weeks. This guy needs to disclose his financial interests in the companies that he held, because we don't know what his potential conflicts of interest are. And the fact that he's a proven liar this week, twice over at a minimum, it just underscores that for me.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And this is the big takeaway, I think, is that if he is lying about this and he's lying about that, what else is he lying about? And we have seen over and over again throughout this Liberal leadership race, the Liberals tripping over themselves, trying to distance themselves from their own record on the economy, of which Mark Carney was an advisor and Chrystia Freeland was the deputy prime minister and the finance minister. And you've got all these Liberals that are saying all these sorts of things, making all these claims. They're making so-called promises and whatnot, and then they are proven to be lying about certain aspects of their story. And so Canadians have to ask, if they are lying about this, then what else are they lying about?
Well, he can't be trusted. That's just the bottom line.
And furthermore, we talked about this last week. So Mark Carney coming out and saying, oh, well, my messaging was muddled, or his team coming out saying the messaging was muddled on this. And I think this is an important point to emphasize again, is this is a guy that wants to be prime minister at a time when we are negotiating in a massive potential trade war with an American president. We have all sorts of global conflicts all over the world. There is inflationary crises. There are all sorts of things that Parliament should be seized with. And quite frankly, Canadians and businesses cannot afford a prime minister that can't get his words right on very basic issues about his own history and his own record on business dealings and the like. And so I'm sorry, words matter when you're the Prime Minister of Canada, and being precise in your language matters. And Canadians deserve a Prime Minister that can actually communicate with some level of integrity on these issues.
And I'm sorry, I forgot one more example. There's another lying liar example from this week. No,
it's
but
too much.
I know, but this one is actually kind of cute. Well, it's not cute. What am I talking about? The people took to the streets over this one. So he made this claim this week, and I'm going to read the quote. That's what I was looking for on my phone here. He made this claim. It was my privilege to work with Paul Martin when he balanced the books and kept the books balanced. So he made this in the English language debate, and you can see the quote right there. The problem is that Mark Carney only started out at the Department of Finance in 2004. So years after this happened. So he's taking credit for something that he wasn't even around for at all. He's that type of guy. He's that guy that lies on his LinkedIn profile, right? Like he comes to one meeting and then claims he's that guy in a work group that comes to one meeting and then claims that he did the whole project. That's Mark Carney, right? With a comment like that. But the funny thing was, you noticed this first. The internet fought back, Sean, on this lie, because people did not like that he was making up claims about his resume, that he was padding his resume.
Yeah, well, you can only hide from the internet for so long. You can hide from the reporters, but you can't hide from the internet. And so people started putting together these graphics and memes throughout X and across social media, putting Mark Carney at the heart of all sorts of historical and momentous occasions that
I think you have a couple, right?
Yeah, that we have some pictures of here.
This is funny. Mark Carney brings home the gold in breakdancing at the 2024 Paris Olympics. #Carney lies. And then I think another good one came from Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. Breaking. Carney swears that he was once considered the fifth Beatle. Oh, what AI-generated images can do for memes now. But I mean, he's right to be mocked. He should be mocked over this. I think Carney lies was trending on Twitter last night, even during the Ontario election results. So people, I think, are noticing this, and people don't like that. But again, it's reemphasizing this obvious narrative that seems to be true, which is he can't be trusted. He cannot be trusted. He lies. What else is he lying about? Just so many cell phones this week. So he is a meme, sir. He is a meme. Remember that episode of Deep?
Yeah, and if there wasn't so much on the line, if there wasn't so much at stake, it would be hilarious. And that's the reality of it, though, is people are concerned about what the next few weeks look like. And I think that's, again, emphasizes why so many Canadians, regardless of their political ideology, are saying we need an election badly in this country to provide some level of stability. But not only that, elections provide probably the highest degree of accountability and spotlight possible. And really, there's nowhere to hide in an election campaign, because you are on full display.
But he's going to become prime minister without going through a general election.
Exactly.
This is, to me, and I think we talked about this last week. How can you be a Liberal member of Parliament and endorse this guy, seeing the lies over and over again? This is a continuation of Justin Trudeau. He is just like Justin on this. Justin Trudeau lied on a bunch of stuff too, major scandals. So if they want a reset of the party, why are they endorsing this guy? Why are they?
Well, yeah, I think the answer to that is they are interested in power and power alone, and they will do or say anything to try and hold on to power at this point. And I think they see Mark Carney as their somehow chance at holding on to power in the short term, and they'll figure out the rest of it later. But the reality is, I think that Canadians are seeing through this, and the more these sorts of lies are exposed, the more the spotlight is shone on Mark Carney and his record and his lies. Canadians are turned off by this. There's nothing people hate worse in politics than hypocrisy. And so when you have a potential prime minister that's coming out and talking about all the things that he wants to do for Canadian families and businesses, but yet then is caught in a lie about recommending that company that he was chair of to move its headquarters to the United States, that really not only rubs people the wrong way, it upsets people at I think a very deep level.
100%. But I do think Canadians are smarter than he thinks they are, and that he will that everything that you just said will come to light under the spotlight of a general election. Because again, as we started off the show out today, Parliament's been prorogued for 6 weeks. The Liberals have had the benefit of less scrutiny, and that will change during a general election. Now, so just in the closing couple of segments here on the show today, I think that brings us to a good question, which is, what do the next couple of weeks look like? And so there was some interesting stuff written on that this week that I want to go through. But just before we close with that, Justin Trudeau's been a busy boy in the last couple of weeks, even though
Has he ever?
Sean, what has Justin Trudeau been busy doing?
Well, we've got an article here that will pop up for people that are watching on YouTube, and the headline reads that Trudeau made 104 federal appointments after announcing resignation.
So
this includes not only, we talked a little bit about some of the senators, but this includes judges and all sorts of other appointments. At least one of them far before the term was even set to expire. It would have expired long after he left his position of prime minister. And again, this comes back to something that we've talked a little bit about before, is typically in the past, precedent has been that when a prime minister announces their intention to resign at the end of either a leadership race or an election of some sort, that they go into what's called caretaker mode, especially even when the House has been prorogued. And here you see Justin Trudeau absolutely bucking the trends and the norms of precedent on this, and running full steam ahead on appointments and announcements, which include spending announcements and things of that nature. So far beyond the norms of a mandate for a prime minister that would be normally in caretaker mode.
And I think it's just another example of why Parliament is so important, right? Because those types of appointments are something that you would scrutinize in parliamentary committees and question periods through different parliamentary procedures. You'd be looking at who is getting appointed to these things and what their backgrounds are. But I think because A, Parliament is prorogued, and B, the legacy media is so fixated on the Liberal leadership race and Carney's coronation, that all of this stuff is just getting swept under the rug. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Trudeau's doing some of this stuff just to ingratiate himself with some people, for his post-political potential options. That's something he could be doing right now, but there's no way to scrutinize that because Parliament is prorogued. So it's just, it's his legacy is just, at some point in the future, we should do a show just on Justin Trudeau's legacy. I feel like a little PTSD by it right now, but we should analyze all of this crazy things that he did in his time in office, but particularly during, the last few weeks since his intent to resign. But the end is nigh on that, I think. And
we can only hope.
One thing that we've gotten a lot of questions in our inbox here, if you're watching this on Substack, folks have been emailing in with questions. Thank you for that. One of the questions we've been asked over and over again is well, what do you think is going to happen? Are we going to be in an election right away? Is Parliament going to return? Why would they do one or the other? And Sean Spear with the Hub, which is a startup media outlet in Canada, he put out a interesting tweet, and there was a piece published in his outlet this week that went through a bunch of the different technical scenarios. And I think it's actually very interesting for the average Canadian who might not follow politics to to see what possibly could happen in the next few weeks. So one possibility is that Carney will essentially go to an election right away. He won't get sworn in as prime minister. But Spear made the point that if that happens, Trudeau and the current cabinet would remain in place until a new prime minister is selected in a general election. So that to me seems like the most logical explanation. And not just because of that reason, but because of the reason that we've been talking about before too, is that he doesn't have to disclose his assets if he's not sworn in as prime minister. And I think that because of that reason, more than anything else, is part of the reason why we might go to an election maybe within the first week or so after March the 9th. That's kind of what I'm hearing. There's a couple of complications if he decides to do the other route that the Hub talked about this week. And that is that if he is sworn in, essentially the whole cabinet gets erased because of some procedural issues. He could just reappoint the cabinet as it sits. But if he becomes prime minister, if he gets sworn in and reappoints the existing cabinet and then goes right to an election anyways, I mean, that looks pretty cynical in the middle of essentially a potential tariff crisis with the US. There's one more wrinkle in that as well, too, is that during prorogation, the governor general can't authorize, I'm way oversimplifying this, but spending can't happen on something called warrants in prorogation, but it can happen if we're in a general election. If the House sits past, like if we come back and the House sits, I think it's March 24th or 25th, maybe 26th, all of a sudden we starting to get into some issues of whether or not the government will continue to be funded. And I don't think he's going to want to get into that scenario where he allows the NDP to have any sort of platform. They're significantly behind in the polls right now. So my analysis is that the easiest and simple thing for him to do is to go to an election right away.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair analysis of everything that's going on. And the other thing is there's just logistical complications that come into play about if and when they would call an election. You talked about the House returning from prorogation at the end of March. The other issue is there's requirements in Canada as to how long election periods can be, so a minimum of 37 days, and you can start doing the math counting forwards and backwards depending on when Carney or somebody potentially wins an election and is sworn in and starting to count days. But you've got Easter in there, which complicates things. And so there's a variety of just logistical complications that are outside of Carney and the Liberals' controls that will sort of, I think, force them in to just one or two options. And so I think when you say the end is nigh, I think that's accurate. It's a bit of a open-ended question as to exactly when that's going to happen. But either way, it seems that we are headed towards an election sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and again, you're right. Like the chief electoral officer will have some input on ensuring like that the election timing doesn't happen on a statutory holiday or a major holiday like Easter Monday or something like that. But I do think we're heading towards an election. I also think that Carney does not want. He's been hiding for the last 3 days, like since all these lies came out. He's not going to want any sort of interregnum period where all of a sudden he's attached to the decisions of Justin Trudeau and he's starting to get scrutinized for that because all of a sudden he is prime minister, right? It almost, even though he is Justin Trudeau, interchangeable, his team is the same, he advised him, I think he's going to just want to go into an election without having that scrutiny. Because again, everything we just talked about on this episode, it's, to me, it just says he doesn't want the scrutiny. He just wants Canadians to think that he's, the best thing since sliced bread. He's going to knock their socks off, fix everything, when in fact, I have some questions. I'm sure other people do too.
Yeah, well, and like you said, he's a proven liar. So regardless of what he says, it should be viewed with the highest degree of skepticism possible, because he's shown himself incapable of telling the truth on minor things. So how could he be trusted to be telling the truth on major things?
Well, I guess we'll know more next week. A week feels like a year in politics these days. So you can tune in next week for your wrap up of Canadian politics. A lot ahead, and by next week, Sean, we'll only be a couple of days away from the announcement of Mr. Carney's, I think, impending coronation here.
Yeah,
so,
it sure seems that way anyway.
It sure seems that way. So for those of you who have listened this far, thank you so much. If you're listening to this on Substack, thank you. Please forward this email to others, get them to sign up. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please click subscribe to this channel. If you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcast provider, don't forget to set your settings to auto download so that you don't miss an episode. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.